know people, know what they're doing, constantly being in charge of yourself so that you can see the world around you more clearly. If you accept that everything is your responsibility, you do your best at everything. But if you want to go into a company and you want to feel safe, then you want your responsibility to be as limited as possible. Because if everything is your responsibility, then you're always behind.
In your role, you've been scaling up teams for many years now. How many people do you think you've hired?
Probably done around 1,500 interviews or so. Meeting all these people, it's been interesting. I think that's probably what's developed me the most on this journey, because there's never the perfect interview.
That's super interesting. How can we work with as many A players as we can?
Okay, the first thing is, do you have access to A players? How do you get access to these A players? And sometimes you gotta fake it a little bit. You gotta call them and try to sell them on it, that sort of thing. But once they're in the door, then you're looking for, do I actually believe that this person is special? And usually people that have a special future also have a special past.
But Carsten, maybe you could give a little introduction to yourself and your journey throughout your career, which has led you to where you are today, and sort of the journey along the way as well.
For me, when I look back, it's been this thing of skipping from one thing to the next, like a career without a plan, really. And for me, I think it really gelled when I started my own team. So in Danske Commodities around 2010 or so, I got the opportunity to make my own team, build it up and do those things. Hire your people yourself, train them, develop them, coach them, all those things. That's the beginning of it all. Before that, it was everything without a plan. At that point, I developed this passion for leadership, so I look for it everywhere now. But 4 years of doing that at Danske, and then moved to another trading company up north. Gave it another 4 years there, developing teams, growing, all those things. It's been a journey of growth every place that I've been. Joined another company that was also small, a lot of growth, but this time in the role of HR.
All within the sector of energy trading, right?
All the time, yeah. It's been a lot of energy trading, but for me, it's also been, that's where it feels like home. It's an industry that has a lot of things going on. It's tough to do trading because you're sitting there focused all the time, almost like a Formula One driver. You have to have that laser focus as you sit there. And at the same time, it's young people, that generally gives a good vibe of things going on. So it's hard, and I don't think I'll ever say goodbye to that industry. It's just too much fun.
And what about your education that kind of led you to energy trading? Just want to touch upon that.
Yeah. I studied finance of all things. So like I'm probably one of the few people in HR that has studied finance, because like who cares about numbers in HR? I think that's one of the problems with HR right now, if we get into that later. But it wasn't that hard to make it into trading, because finance is where they do their recruitment.
Okay, that's interesting.
I thought it was interesting when you said, you sort of mentioned in the beginning there that it was like a career path without a plan, sort of.
Yeah.
And but you've actually accomplished some pretty extraordinary things along the way, and gotten to a point that you really love now. Yeah. So what did you have as sort of your like north guiding star during this period without a plan that led you to a place where you actually want to be?
Yeah, and I think if we go back, it's kind of it has to tap into this moment in your life. I remember doing an exercise of discovering your why, and you're saying like, okay, what are these like key moments in your life, right? And so I lost a friend of mine back in 2001. So this is before I started working, as a full-time professional, and there I just realized I'm not aware of people around me. Like my friend was having problems. He ended up jumping off a bridge, and it was like this thing like, okay, I gotta pay attention. Like there are people in my life I have no idea what they're doing, and so that kind of
hard.
Yeah, it was a tough moment, but it also made me realize that there's so much to learn about other people. And I remember like the first year after, I was just like looking at everyone else and thinking, who's in trouble, right? And so I think that's kind of what sets the stage for being so interested and invested in people. And that's been the common theme. Like you can, like, even if you don't have that management role, you can still impact other people. And that's been the common thing. And sometimes it's been in more of a distant role. HR is very, distant from the individual. and how you work there, but it's always with that mindset of how can I change someone's life today.
And when that thing happened with your friend, and you started looking at all the other people that you know and thinking who is in trouble, was that because you at that point in time felt that you were in such a good place that you could kind of, if someone was in trouble, you could be...
I think the honest answer about that is it was some kind of almost paranoia, right? So it's like, oh, there's this guy, and I was even living with the guy at the time, right? So it's like, how did I miss this? Like, I should have realized that there was something up, right? And thinking like, okay, if I don't see that, what else am I missing, right? So it's kind of this like young, you're just getting out of your teen years, and now you're in your early 20s, and it's like, okay, it's time to get the head out of my ass and just be like, okay, let me pay attention, right?
That was a tough moment.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you feel that you're in contact with your destiny somehow.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so I lost him and this feels bad, but there's no sense of being a victim in that. It was just like, okay, now there's a call for me. It's like, okay, people need me to be strong for them, and I need to tell a lot of people, give them the bad news and all those things, and just like, wow, I was chosen to do this, right? So whenever it got hard, it was like, well, I was chosen to do this hard thing.
Yeah. What was there? Would you say, like, there's a lot of people who also talk about that there are certain periods in people's life who do extraordinary stuff where it was like a defining moment. Would you say that was kind of your moment?
Yeah, it was definitely one of them. Yeah, that sense of, okay, now I've met a challenge that's bigger than anything I've seen before. And it's like, okay, so how tough are you, right? So I did running for many years. So I've run like a 5K, a 10K. I've done like 30K and that sort of thing. It was just like, okay, well, like that feeling of like pushing against life, all of a sudden it's just like, yeah, you can't run yourself out of this. You can't do it harder. You have to have it up here.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so this is what an emotional challenge is, right? Okay, well, let's get through this. Like, and I remember my dad, he was talking about it. He's like, yeah, son, you'll be fine. I'm like, how do you know? Like, how do you ever know that someone's going to be fine? But at the time, it was the biggest compliment, but also the biggest support that he could give me. It's like, you are going to be fine. It's like, thanks. Like, then I'll just go do it.
Yeah. It's crazy. I wonder if that was just also maybe him projecting, like the fear of losing you into something, like just making it a statement towards you, like, you're going to be fine. If that was like his communication of being like, I love you, please come to me if there's something. Yeah. But at that time, I don't know with future generations or with your dad, but like in my own family, communication is not really something that's, or emotional intelligence through rigorous communication have not been on the whiteboard in my family, I would say. So I was just wondering if you could go back and relive that moment, if you now with what you know could see that was probably what he was trying, but the communication form was just like, you're going to be fine.
Well, I mean, I always say that 2001 was the worst year in my life. So actually for my dad, it's kind of a complex story, because that year is the year that he finally broke from being like an alcoholic. So his life crashed there in May. So it's like, okay, we got May going on. He does that. And then you got, in August, that's my friend. And then you have September 11th. And I'm like, okay, this year I'm done with it. Like, let's get rid of 2001 and just like, let's go.
Yeah.
That sounds like a tough year.
It was, but it wasn't. I think that's the thing that you got to realize, that, whenever you're in it, that's just your new normal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
that
like
makes sense.
The thing that's tough is the guy that's, 400 pounds that gets off the couch and does his first 5K. That's the tough part, right?
Yeah.
Like once you get used to the shit, it's just how it is. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It just becomes the new benchmark.
Yeah.
Of bad shit happening to you. But there's also a lot of people who only from there spiral downwards, right? And it's about can you turn it into something? And that's where I think there's a lot of people, including yourself, where it's like, yeah, that's tough, that I need to overcome. Okay, new shit happens. Okay, that's tough, that I need to overcome. Where someone is just like, they break at the first point, but if you can kind of use it to something, which you've obviously done.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, there was never any other thought. It was like, well, we're put on the planet to do something, which is to live, right? So whether you are religious or whatever, like helps you find some kind of purpose, the only reason why there's another one of you is because we're here to live, right? We're not here to just die and end quickly, right? We're supposed to procreate and prolong our lives and gather as much as we can, in form of experiences and wealth, and then we check out at some point. Like whatever you believe, that's kind of be the undercurrent of it, right? And for me, it's just like, well, like I'm not offing myself. That's not happening, right?
Yeah,
it'll be someone else that takes me. I'm not going to do it myself.
And from that day on, take us through like that happens, and then how do you kind of view your education from there?
Yeah.
How old are you at that point?
So in one, I'm 25.
Yeah.
So 2001, I'm 25, and I guess it's that point where you're like, okay, I'm starting to develop a life and then an identity, but also, at the time you feel like you know everything, but as soon as you're 30 or 40, you're like, oh, that guy, like, what did he know? Right?
Oh yeah.
But
that was some blissful ignorance back then.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've talked to people about this when we're looking at like emotional development, and like the way that I look at it is like you're 18, 19 or 20, that's day zero, right? So someone who is 25 is 5 years old. When you get to 30, you're 10 years old. So you've developed twice as much by 30 as you have by 25. Because all that stuff before, you're just confused and you're running around, you have no idea.
Yeah.
And that, I think, maybe I was late to the party and at 25 knew too little, right? And then it was time to make up for it. And, some of it you can find in books, but I think you just adapt this learning mindset. I knew that kind of my reality depended on me being able to learn how people work and to make the best of it. So I had roles before as, like a scout leader and that sort of thing. And I'm just looking back and like, you didn't know people. Like you could have done much better if you had known people. And so that became the mission, like know people, know what they're doing, constantly being, in charge of yourself so that you can see the world around you more clearly. Like if you don't realize that you're a red light bulb, then you think that the whole world is red.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, like how do I take that red light out of it and meet the world as it is, see it what it really is.
Could you actually expand on that? Like what are some things that you do in order to keep yourself in that position where you can see the world the way that is optimal for you?
Well, I think like let's say that we have two colors that you can have, right? So you can be a red light bulb, you can be a green one. And sometimes what you got to do is like you turn on the red and then you turn on the green and you're like, okay, between those two, I can figure out what's going on. So anything that's red will look white when you shine the red light on it. But once you put the green on, it doesn't look white anymore, right? So you can do this thing where you change yourself constantly and adapt to your surroundings, or change yourself to view and observe your surroundings, and then you can see the world more clearly. So you understand that I'm bringing or in my case, bringing an energy into the room, and that energy changes the room. Right. So like in our talk, okay, you bring up someone, taking their own life. It's like, okay, mood goes down. And then you're like, okay, well, let's see if we can find something funny, to counterbalance that. And just like trying to be so in contact with what you are, then you can trust that the world around you is actually what you think it is.
Yeah, because when you were saying that, I was just thinking like, I wonder if that's what I'm doing when I'm trying to like have an open mind, like when you're like when you hit someone in a conflict, you're like, if you're a little bit open-minded, then you're like, why is he not seeing it like this? Like there must be something here. Like, and when you really get into like working with yourself, then you try to take the other person's perspective. Is that in the same kind of way that you're thinking it, but you're just doing it yourself?
Yeah.
Before any.
There's an element of that, which is like whenever you bring something out there, people will respond to that. So you bring in an energy of positivity, and you're like, okay, they respond to that. So okay, I know that about him, right? And then you bring in a new element, like, can we be serious together? And then you learn that about him, and you're constantly putting different things out there to see where are they, right? Everything is this experiment of saying, okay, well, show me what you can reflect back to me, and then finding the limits of our relationship in a way.
What's been some of your biggest challenges? I'm curious to hear about as you've kind of navigated this sort of unusual path from A to B, if you want to call it A to B, to where you are now, going from chemistry to finance, and then becoming heavily involved in the HR side of things and building up multi-billion-dollar companies. As a matter of fact, there have been some. We kind of know the pivotal moment.
Yeah.
But then, what if some challenges that you've been like, okay, didn't expect this, or other pivotal challenges that you've had?
Well, I think the thing that is the challenge is that you have to reinvent yourself constantly, right? So in what I've done, I've taken new roles and done new things. And for me, it's been this almost like ADHD approach where it's like, well, I'm kind of done with this. Let's try the next thing, right? Okay. So like constantly chasing that novelty, the new thing.
Because there is a new thing, or because the old one is fizzling on your personal?
Because I'm just done with it. Like, so I gotta like go to the next thing.
Yeah.
Like I remember it strongly at the end of my time at NIAS. It was like, okay, like that's it. I'm like, what else am I gonna do? I've built the teams. I've developed my career to the maximum point here. What can I do? And then it's like, big shift. I go to be an individual contributor again. So now I'm the guy doing all the work, so leading a team of 60, boom. Now I'm the only guy that does anything, right?
Because you got hired into the next.
Yeah, into
Can
the
you
next
give
role.
a little background of that?
Sorry. So my next role, I go into HR,
yeah,
and I'm the only person in HR.
It's a new energy company startup.
15 people at the time, and we're, so I'm doing PowerPoints, I'm doing all those things, getting things ready, even like buying chocolate online. I mean, whatever was the thing at the time, you did that, right? And that's the shift is tremendous, right? So I remember a situation. I was in the previous job working at NIAS, 60 employees. I come and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot something. I just say to one of my employees, can you take my car and then go get that for me? And I was like, yeah, it wasn't anything like that once you changed and you were the only guy, right? Like everything you needed, you had to go pick it up, right? Yeah. And so to have the mental flexibility to do that, right? To be like, okay, you have 60 people running around trying to do what you tell them to do, and now you're doing that for someone else. That's tough, and it's tough on your ego if you don't leave it at the door, right?
Can you go back and remember like one situation where you're just like, is this really what I'm doing right now? Like when you were looking back at your old job, whereas like this specific situation, if it's like ordering the chocolate, or is there something when you go back and remember where you're just like, I wonder if this was the right decision? But of course you knew it was, but
yeah. But I think like moving tables, like, so like I moved other people's tables because we didn't have much of an IT team. So me and the IT guy, we got together and we're like, okay, let's make a plan for how to move tables around. And then we would take the wires out and then move the tables and then put the wires back in. And just like, like really? Like, this is usually what you pay people like 150 crowns an hour to do. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing it.
This is my day today.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, it'll get better.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Also, when you talk about how to progress in different industries, and especially what you see with younger generations, I don't know if you've experienced that when in your HR. It's like my experience is that it's getting worse and worse with people actually willing to do something outside of exactly what they're hired for.
Yeah. And I think that was the thing for me to change that ego of being like, I remember thinking at some point, like, I'm too full of myself. Like, or actually, I'm too fucking full of myself at the time. Like, what am I that's so much better than anyone else, except for being the one guy that everybody asks the question? And usually I would just be like, I'll ask someone else the answer. And then like, I would give them the answer from someone else. It's like, well, all I am is just connecting these people. How is that so fucking special, right? But, you know, a little bit of moving some tables and ordering some chocolate online, and all of a sudden that ego is doing very nice. But I think what it is that if you accept that everything is your responsibility, you do your best at everything. But if you want to go into a company and you want to feel safe, then you want your responsibility to be as limited as possible. Because if everything is your responsibility, then you're always behind.
Yeah.
Like there's always more you can do.
Yeah, that doesn't feel safe.
But it's also how you get that owner mindset, right? And it's the thing that changes companies if people have that owner mindset that they wanna do the best for the company. Like it doesn't matter if it's my favorite thing as long as it's the company's favorite thing.
That makes sense.
In your role, you've been scaling up teams for many years now. How many people do you think you've hired?
At least 100. I mean, over the years, right? And that's just like in my teams, right?
Yeah.
And then like I was thinking about it the other day. It's like probably done around like 1,500 interviews or so. Just like meeting all these people. It's been interesting, you know. And then I think that's probably what's developed me the most on this journey, because there's never the perfect interview, right? So you train and you prepare yourself and like, okay, this is a good question. I gotta put that one in the bank, and then I'm gonna ask that again, right?
Yeah.
But you never get it completely right. So it's like, okay, the one thing you start asking 3 or 4 times in a row, and then you're like bombing on the next one. You're like, I shouldn't ask that question again.
Okay, so you mean never the perfect interview from your side?
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, from my side.
I initially took it as like the perfect employee doesn't ever come give the perfect interview. In some
I think
way,
like there was one guy, I was working at Danske, and we hired a guy, and I was like, afterwards I just looked at the people on the hiring committee. I'm like, that guy did really well, didn't he? Like whether or not he was a great candidate, that's one thing, but like you just couldn't help but like the guy. He was talking about stories of visiting India, and like he showed like high levels of compassion. He was also like super focused on what he wanted to do, clear about himself, and you know, it's just he did such a great job of, you know, selling himself, but also not, you know, coming off as fake or anything like that. And it's just like, wow, that guy did really well.
He had a good foundation.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. I mean, he's my one guy. I'll remember him forever, I think.
That's super interesting. Like, because like one thing Mikkel and I we've been talking about a lot is like, how can we work with as many A players as we can, and incorporate that into everything that we do, because that's what's going to ultimately have a big impact on the outcome. Do you think in those terms, during those 1,500 interviews that you've been doing and hundreds of people you've been hiring, do you have some kind of criteria of like an A player versus a B player? And do you have any secret sauce you can share with us for like dividing it and kind of seeking out? How do you find this person's an A player or they're not?
We'll just take one step back, and it's like, well, okay, the first thing is, do you have access to A players, right? Because sometimes you just got to be like, okay, I'm in this level and I only have access to C players, and then recognize that, okay, I'm going to leave here maximum with a B player. And that's if I like kind of sucker the guy into taking a job that he shouldn't have taken.
Based on the position or geography or
what your company can do.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have? Like, what value do you have to that future employee, right? So they look at you and like, how much do I want to work there? So if you're working in a boring field with low salary, and you know, like the office looks like crap and location is bad, it's away from everything, like your chances of getting an A player are smaller.
The deck's stacked against you a little bit.
Yeah. So the next thing is just like, okay, how do you get access to these A players? And sometimes you gotta fake it a little bit. You gotta maybe call them and try to sell them on it, that sort of thing, right? But once they're in the door, then you're looking for, do I actually believe that this person is special, right? And usually people that have a special future also have a special past. And so you got to look at that and be like, okay, what's special about your past, right? And sometimes it's a special challenge, or it's just like a tough life, or whatever it might have been that made that person special. Or maybe it's that they've done something that's special. But in those talks, you got to get to that thing and be like, okay, where are you on this thing, right? Next thing you got to do is that you got to find out if they can reflect, if they have any sense of like what's going on. So if you have like special character because of your special past, and you have the ability to think about yourself in relationship to other things around you, then you might be an A player.
Can you notice your own red lights and green lights, as you mentioned before?
Doing what I'm talking about now? Or
like, can they do that? Like, are they aware of themselves?
like that?
Reflect?
Yeah,
can they reflect in
that? But also just like you asked them a question like, okay, well, what do you think about this? We were doing an interview with someone who wanted to do an internship with the company that I'm at now. And so I said to them, okay, if you think about the fact that supermodels try to starve themselves and people that are professional bikers also starve themselves, how are those things different? And that's one hell of a question, right? But your ability to answer that in a meaningful way tells me what level of reflection that you're on. So it's like, okay, well, one of the things is for your appearance. The other thing is, to drive faster, and like, but they also get in the same kind of problems, right? Both of them are prone to anorexia and things like that. And like, your ability to break that problem down, which is, there's no right answer.
No.
Right?
But it's just your ability to try and think about and reflect upon the answer, and kind of
empathy and different.
And structure your thoughts maybe as well. That was one thing that I was thinking, is like how well you can either be like super reflective where you just ramble off, which is exciting, but then there's also like people who can ramble off and then summarize the steps of why did I actually get here.
Yeah. And I think what we do a lot of times when we interview is that we try to do that within their field. So we're saying, okay, give me, like, you have this challenge at work. How would you solve that? And then we get answers that fit with what we expect them to say and things like that. But take them outside of their field and be like, well, how big is that engine? Because you might just be giving me memory, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, I've done this before, so this is what we're going to do again. Now I'm giving you a problem that you've definitely not solved this problem before. So how's your process, right? Is it credible that you're going to be able to do this when we meet the next challenge? Because in knowledge companies, it's that next challenge and dealing with that's going to make the difference, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we've figured out for ourselves as well. It's really finding the people that can get those challenges out and reflect upon them.
We've also noticed that the people who tend to be in the top of the pile, for example, for air flight with a very engineering role, that they always have some side project.
Yeah.
But this whole portfolio of side projects that has nothing to do with anything that they've ever been paid for, but like, I built my own electric skateboard, or, all kinds of stuff like that. Like, that's what I'm working on right now. Like, that's how they spend their free time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the last thing, which is find things that are correlating, right? So if you're an engineer and you do a lot of projects on the side, those are validators of your ability to be an engineer. It might not be the best thing to find a new actor, right? That would be something else you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I've wondered also a lot of the times is when we're going back to our previous talk about the foundation and how you can keep focus, are the true A players also someone who from the get-go sets boundaries? Have you noticed that? Someone who comes in and be like, I kind of know what I'm worth, so this is the way I work, and I'm open to do stuff, but I also know myself really, really well to know that these are the things that I need to perform. So if you can give that, I'm open to. Or how have you experienced that?
Yeah, you'd think that'd be the case, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's the most obvious thing, but then all of a sudden you get that one person who's so much different than anyone else. So I'd say, like, if you want to do a safe bet, try to find that guy. But if you want the guy that's above that guy, he usually doesn't have that. So he has more of that mindset of like, well, like, I'm Like I'm here for the big difference that I'm going to make. And there's nothing that's too good or whatever it might be. Like I'm going to make a difference here. It reminds me of this thing that I heard where it's like Michael Jordan didn't try to become wealthy. He tried to become really good at playing basketball and then became wealthy. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to have that thing that drives you, and you got to pursue that. And if that's why you set clear boundaries, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the only thing, right?
Yeah, because that's what I mean is if there's someone who've kind of been there, done that before, and they know the recipe, and one of the recipes is I need to work out 4 times a week. I need to have my lunch and breaks at this point because then I can focus, and they are committed. But like you were talking about, like the structure, right, with the calendar, that you do these things to perform the best.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've seen, or have you just noticed that there are those type of people, but there's the people who are above are usually just someone who goes with the flow and let the North Star guide them?
Yeah. I think a good way to explain it is to bring in this like metaphor of refereeing. So the first thing that you do is like, okay, I got to learn the rules, and then I got to do everything by the book. And then like the next thing that you learn is like, sometimes don't do everything by the book. So you got to learn when not to do things by the book. And then the next thing that you learn is like, okay, well, change when it's the right time to not do things by the book. So there are always layers to it like that. And I think you say that that most of these guys have this sense of, okay, how do I get the best out of myself? That's true when you have developed talent. People that have experience and maybe they're 35 or something like that, but try to find that 22-year-old that has that kind of control in his life.
That's
it's tough,
almost
right?
not existing. Yeah.
And if that's the group that you're fishing for talent in, then you got to look for something else. Right?
That makes sense.
Is there like speaking of that, unless you, well, let me put it this way so it's a little more open. In the experience that you've had, how often are you able to hire the peer A players, and is that even always the goal? Can you have a team of all A players? Does that function well, or do you need some level of different level of players to support them, or can an A player be a supporter in a supportive A player way? Is there a golden ratio, or like what have you kind of found out through your experience?
Ironically, this morning I was going through my feed, and then I saw Dwight Howard, who's talking about that there's always this stigma to being a role player on a team. It's like, well, maybe my destiny is to become a role player and figure out what is my role and how do I do that. There's nothing less shiny about being in support of someone else if you're looking at the big picture. Like, who do you want to be? Do you want to be Zlatan Ibrahimovic constantly chasing a goal, or you find being Mikael Laudrup who passes to someone and then they score? Like, who's a bigger star? In my mind, Mikael Laudrup is a better soccer player than Zlatan Ibrahimovic, but he doesn't score as many goals, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a value to being in support of someone else that you just got to look for. It's easy with the soccer players because they get paid millions no matter what they do. But at work, sometimes the best role that you can take is in support of someone else. So if you have a job or a job function that requires there to be balance and be people that are supportive, you have to find people that can be that can be there and not have to like make the kill or whatever it might be. But you might not have that need, right? Maybe you just need an actor that goes on stage, and you're not putting together a team of support players on stage. So what is your team, right? But in most business, there's always a role for someone that doesn't want to kill everyone else, right? But if you're looking for that killer, how do you find him? That's the question you got to ask yourself, right?
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because in society right now, it's becoming extremely popular to become an entrepreneur or, solopreneur, work from everywhere, and all these things. And I saw this guy, Patrick Bet-David, he had on his stage for his conference, and it had like, CFO, CXO roles, you could be a solopreneur, entrepreneur, and he had this whole list. And then he came to the last one, and it was called supporter. And he said, "There's many of you who thinks that you want to be all of this, but at the end of the day, what you should do is be a supporter.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be the one who is willing to sacrifice what it takes to be in these roles, and that is okay.
Yeah.
And there's other of you who's in the other ones, you can't be a supporter because you either have too big of an ego or other stuff. And it just made me realize there's so much in society that don't throw enough light on those supporters.
Yeah.
Like trash, like cleaning the, like, what is that called in English?
Like trash collecting? Or?
Trash collecting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's so many of roles like that in our society that is completely in the dark.
Yeah.
But if they stopped working, it wouldn't be very long before all the white collar would be like,
It's not that nice to be around here.
What are we going to do? I don't want to do it. Do you want to do it?
And it's actually one of the things that we also do a little check for in most of the interviews that we do. So if we can, we talk to a receptionist or someone that's met the person that doesn't have a fancy role, right? They're not on the interviewing panel. They're not the CEO, but they just have an interaction with them. And whenever that interaction is bad, you just leave it. Like, don't hire the guy that has a bad talk with the receptionist. So like whenever I've hired, I always try to like get to the receptionist and be like, okay, what did you think?
Yeah.
And just like, it never fails. Whenever you're like, I don't know about this guy, you go to the receptionist, they're like, that guy, don't hire that guy. So like sometimes whenever you don't get the job, it's the receptionist that like
bring chocolates for the receptionist.
Yeah.
Folks.
Yeah.
But it's
Makes sense though.
I don't remember where it was from, but someone mentioned this thing of like taking 4 or 5 guys out for a dinner, trying to find out the next CEO of the company, and how they behaved with the staff, the waiting staff, was a determining factor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how are you with the people that support you is going to make the difference between whether you are a quick career as a star, or if you are like long-term going to make a successful living.
I think that's actually in Patrick Lencioni's one of his books with the where he invites the guy out for an interview and see how he like answers the waitress. Yeah. I think you're right on that one for sure.
And I think we can learn from sports like Formula One, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you only have one guy on the podium jumping and spraying the champagne. But if you look at the first thing that they do when they get out of the car, they get out and they jump over to their staff, right?
Yeah.
They show gratitude to their staff for making me able to win today.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they do. Before they celebrate themselves, they celebrate their support staff.
That's true.
And for me, that's one of the parts of that high level talent, right?
Is that something that you would do a lot in your own leadership in your career?
Like the most important word in my vocabulary is thank you. Like it's for everything, right? You book a meeting with me, thank you for booking the meeting. Like gratitude has to be the fundamental principle if you're going to make it very far.
Appreciation.
Yeah.
I actually remember one time, Carsten, you actually, I don't even remember what the situation was, but you said thank you to me for something because I had done something. And I was like, it was not, you don't have to say thank you for that. And you're like, hey man, you've kind of just robbed me of the opportunity to express gratitude to you. Do you understand that? Like, and that was actually kind of funny because I was like, what?
Yeah.
But then, reflective back, but then you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny actually. Or funny learning, I suppose.
And I think it's that mindset of not wanting all the time, to be happy to give is also like a fundamental of that star player at some point, who's absolutely fine being like, okay, how can I help someone else, right?
I have a question from 23-year-old Trav in that the supervisor role again, because back then I remember one thing that I had the same viewpoint. I'm like, I felt really unappreciated in that my previous role. So I was like, I'm going to say thank you a lot. Like, I'm always just going to be grateful to my employees for what they're doing for the department. So I would say that a lot, like, hey, thanks for making this chemical bath. Thanks for doing this analysis. Thanks for cleaning that up. I was just saying that all the time. And then in a feedback meeting we had with our HR at the time, where it was like my team and me, and I was like super conscious about saying thank you a lot, right? One of the number one things is like they felt they didn't feel appreciated by me.
Yeah.
And I was like, but I say I'm thanking them all the time. And of course I've reflected on it since then. But like when you take that, how does thank you not become something that they don't hear anymore? Because you always say it.
Yeah.
So how does that stay something that they can absorb and be like, okay, I feel appreciated?
Yeah. I think, and this is not to make fun of Americans, but it's kind of the price to say what I'm gonna do, which is when you say how are you, and it's just how are you, it's just hi in a different form.
Yes.
Then the answer doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you have to learn, is that when you have true appreciation for what people do, then you will be able to show that and be like, hey man, you really helped me out by taking care of that. Right? Now it's no longer just thank you. It's like, hey, I want you to see that you're making an impact on me. So if that impact is not believable with your thank you, then your thank you is worthless. Right?
Mm.
So you gotta communicate it like really. And if you don't have gratitude, you're not going to be able to.
There's something about that with also saying hi, and also what we experienced in the States, because now that you say it, one thing that I really like about the States versus Denmark is, first of all, that you at least a lot of the times actually say hello to people. But the shallow, how are you doing, is more when you're Danish, you're like, oh, he's asking me how I'm doing. You know? But it's more like what you say, in a lot of the times, it's just like a polite way to say hi. And really tweaking your communication to not only what you speak verbally, but also the way that you have eye contact, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like if the other guy, he's on his way out of the door and he, oh, did you leave? Yeah, it's on your table. Oh, thank you. Then that's the lowest you can get. No eye contact, no nothing. But when you really have that connection and you're like, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then it becomes something that you can kind of, put in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But when it becomes that thing where it's like, I've tried the exact same thing, and it's so funny when you said that 23, I had the exact same thing in my first thing, just being so nice to people, where at some point it almost feels like that you're losing touch with what you're saying, but you feel it all the time.
Yeah.
Or at least I felt it all the time, saying thank you, that it had weight behind it, but really thinking that you have to change the setting. Like you cannot keep saying thank you, because that's like, it becomes a coping mechanism for when people just do something for you.
And then you're back to the fundamental thing about how do you impact other people. And this was a model that I picked up early on in my manager career. A coach showed me this, like, okay, here's what people expect of me, and here's the outer boundary of what can I get away with, right? And in between that's where I got to be all the time. I got to challenge people's, idea of me so that I do something that they remember. Like you remember me challenging you on whether you robbed me of an opportunity to show gratitude.
Yeah.
And so that's like, that made an impact. And I don't precisely remember what I was thankful for, but I remember that that's going to make a difference, right? I remember arguing with you about whether or not, I get to be grateful, right? And that's what you like.
Goddamn Americans!
I'm actually a human being. So you gotta constantly be on the verge of that. I had a situation there. It's like, how did drop off go? And then the response was like, fine. I'm like, can you give me the notes, right? Because I wasn't happy with fine. Right?
Yeah.
Like I wanted more than that. I'm not just like checking, are you beyond okay, the barrier for being okay, or are you in trouble? It's like, no, actually, like, how did it go? Can we talk about it, right? So wanting to know is the precursor for being able to talk about these things,
like establishing some kind of connection versus just extracting data.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm different than other people, but whenever I walk the streets, I look up, and then like there are people that smile back to me and say hi. I'm thinking, I don't know you, but apparently I look like I'm so interested in you that you must think that I know you. Like I'm like, okay, hi, like how are you doing, right? So you gotta be at that level where you're constantly engaging with the world at a high level, if you want that response to be meaningful. And you're gonna have a thank you that misses, and that's fine. Right?
Yeah. Okay, cool stuff.
When you're talking about like the appreciation in terms of that, going back to Travis's talk about when you see the A players and B players, is that something that have been a key metric that you've been able to point out different individuals and saying like that guy he's going to the A, that guy he's going to B, of the way they kind of behaved on the interviews in terms of appreciation?
I think that you probably have, if you do a proper process on your interviews, you probably have an 80% idea of if someone is going to be who you think they are going to be, but you're going to be wrong. And that's part of the game.
Yeah.
Like you get that guy in and you're like, that wasn't what I hoped for. But you at least, like, you're hoping that you at least get it right, whether they're in the top half of your team or the bottom half.
Yeah.
So whenever you're hiring, like, okay, I think this is the top half. If you get that wrong, then you feel pretty bad about yourself.
How fast do you normally know that?
Like I was talking to a guy that was yesterday, and he was talking about he does these events where people come out and they're waiting staff that show up. And he said there was someone that came in, and on the first, like in the first hour, they're getting instructions, and in the second hour, they were already like, okay, we can do this, and engaged and trying to do something like that. You can feel pretty quickly. But then there's all this stuff that's so hard to know ahead of time. Is how's their learning curve going to be? Are they going to be able to figure this out? And those things will take time. But if you have a cultural fit, you should know within the first month or so, if you really engage with your employees.
And I think that is a great segue to the opposite side of the coin from hiring, which is, of course, when you have to fire people and let people go.
Yeah.
And I won't ask you how many times you've done that, but I assume it's been once or twice at least in that role that you've had over the years.
Yeah.
And how has that evolved for you from the first couple of times you've had to fire someone to, I assume you have much more of a systemized way now, and a way of like doing it in a sort of human way and like respectful way and professional. And how do you approach that? Because that's an awkward situation.
Yeah.
And especially for people who have never had to do it before, but now have to do it for the first time.
Yeah, and if you're sitting out there and you don't have an HR team or anything like that, that's probably some of the advice that you want to pick up on, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how do I get rid of someone in a good way, right?
It feels very mean.
Yeah. And it is life-changing to be fired. But it's also, in so many situations, better for that individual. So I've had to let people go in my team. I've had to be in charge of dismissing employees as an HR representative. And it's something that you got to take seriously, right? But it starts way earlier than the time that you let them go. It's like, okay, we go back and we're like, okay, did we have enough of a process on this guy? Like, did we actually try to save him in some respect, right? And obviously, if you're early on and you can feel the vibe isn't there, you let him go, and it's going to be kind of a loose thing. But this could be someone that you had in your team for 1, maybe 2 years or something like that. And you're like, I'm sorry, like the company has just run away from you. You're no longer able to do this. And that's when it starts to hurt a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy, I love this guy back in the day when he was really performing, but now I have to say goodbye to this guy, and that hurts, right? And the only way to do that well is to be prepared. And so that's what we do. In HR, we prepare that like the most important day that we have. So everything is timed down to the minutes, and, like who goes where and what time. And you try to involve 2 or 3 people at least, to get this to work, right?
Like to get the firing to work?
The firing to work, yeah. So that you have...
What type of things do you prepare, and what do you time out? And
yeah, well, there's things like with many of the firings that we do, you have to take people out of their job, right? Some people can be fired and just left in their job and then continue to do that, but we can't do that. So we have to be sure that whenever they hit the streets, they can't like run home and then start to do bad things to the company, right? So we have to protect the company. That's the fundamental thing. And that's a technical challenge, making things just like shut down. And,
clean cut.
Yeah. And then you got to wipe the phone and you got to do all those things. You have IT coming in and wiping the phone. You have the manager that has to do the actual short message. And then he has to go to his team and let them know, well, actually, John is not coming back from the meeting we just had because we've let him go. And coordinating all that is something that, like when you sit down with the plan, it's not hard to do. But once you don't do that, that's when things start going badly. Because then maybe you're running around, you're trying to get to a situation that you got to fix, or the guy from IT isn't coming down, or whatever it might be. Like whenever it runs smoothly, it doesn't seem like a problem. But when it doesn't, that's when you start to panic as HR. And that's when it becomes a bad experience for the employee. And the second thing is that you gotta plan the vibe, right? So the manager will come in and be like, "Hey man, we're letting you go. It's tough. Sorry about it." And then there'll be this like temptation to dig into it and be like, "Okay, well, what did I do wrong, and how can I do this?" And that's when you, as the HR representative, gotta shield that, right? So if you don't have the opportunity to have HR in the room, then find someone else that can do that. So if that's your manager and you're the CEO, then you have to join that and you have to shield the manager from this decision, right? So like, you got to get the manager out. That's who you're angry at, right? You're an employee and this guy just let you down, right? He fired me. How could he do that? So you got to get him out of the room so you can manage energy, right? You got to get all the hostility out of it. Because once that becomes a shouting match, that's a long day at the office, right?
Yeah. Then you start to lose those years off your life, right? As the manager that we talked about.
Yeah, because I've had that happen, right? And it's no good. It's just no good.
Okay. But then you're stuck with it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're,
and that's where you as an individual have to do the most important thing that you've ever done in your life is like, calm the fuck down, right? So this guy is being let go. You're kind of nervous about what's going to happen because you don't know. You don't know if he's going to be cool or he's going to be crazy. So you just got to stay calm and be like, okay, the agenda, right? You know what's happening. So you're like, all right, the next thing that's going to happen is that we're going to have IT come down here and they're going to wipe your phone. And he's like, but how could they do this? Like, yeah, well, if you have any questions later on, you can come back to me. Like constantly just stay on track, right? But he hasn't given me an explanation. Can I get an explanation? We will do our best to give you an explanation in writing. So all of these things, like practice these things. And there's a checklist that you can find, many resources for it online. The important thing is that you follow it. Mm-hmm. And then you gotta stay ice cold.
Okay. So before actually, when you were saying, hey, John, have some bad news, we have to let you go. That's unfortunate, but that's how it is. It's literally like a conversation like that. It's actually not listing out why or anything like that. Why do you avoid that type of...
The primary reason is that once you hear the words, you have been let go, your mind is in panic mode. So anything that I say after that is worthless.
Yeah.
So it's like, we want to encourage the conversation later on because anything that we say is treated with panic. Right. So the first thing that I do whenever you tell me the reasons why I've been let go is like, I'm going to start to negotiate. I'm going to negotiate my way back into this job. And that's not going to work.
Yeah. That's so funny because my experience with that, I've also fired a couple of people too.
Yeah. We've been down that road.
But what I've actually experienced is there's only been one time where it's not been super calm. But all the other times, I've actually just said one thing is like, you know why you're getting fired. And I've gotten an acknowledgement, a nod, and that was it. Yeah. And then, just as you said, the first time I had to fire someone, I was so fucking scared. But then it becomes easier.
Yeah.
And you also become much more simple. Yeah. Like you don't argue, you don't do anything.
No.
There was the only one guy who went totally bananas, because he definitely did. He definitely didn't acknowledge that he was getting fired, and there was like kind of the situation I got.
And he might have been low on the reflecting measurement that Carsten talked about earlier.
Oh yeah,
but I think that's also important to say that usually it doesn't go bad.
No,
but we're preparing for that scenario. Right?
Yeah.
We're preparing for the scenario where it's like, okay, this guy is freaking out, and like let's just treat everyone like they're gonna freak out, and not try to create an opportunity for it to go badly. Right? We want to minimize conflict and like bad message, get that guy out. All right, now I'm just doing emotional CPR on the guy that's left. The guy has just been canned, and then I'm like, okay, like, take a moment, and we can go get your stuff for you, or you can do it yourself. You want to say goodbye and that sort of thing. For me, the thing that always gets me is that whenever they go back and get their stuff, people are ice cold. Like, I don't know why that is, but just like they come back into the room, and because they've just received the news that he's getting fired, they have no idea how to act.
Yeah.
So they're just like, hey, and then they go back to work because they're just like paranoid of what's going to happen.
Yeah, you probably don't want any association to that.
No, and it's like,
that's a really cool like perspective. I wonder if that's why, because now that you just say it, I was just like,
I ain't friends with him.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't know me. Like, I mean, I was going to suggest that you guys get rid of this person. Actually, I'm actually happy they're gone.
I'm with you, boss. Like, you made a good call.
Yeah.
I support that one.
Yeah. And so
interesting.
Yeah, so it just becomes this ice cold atmosphere. And sometimes it's not the case, but most of the time it's just tough to watch how, they walk. If walk of shame is bad, this is the walk of ultimate shame, right?
Yeah.
You're going in and you're getting your stuff and like, okay, that's it. I failed you guys. See you later. Right.
But I suppose also in the example that you're talking about here is an employee who haven't gone up to speed for over a long time, and there have been talks about it doing something, but they have not had the ability to like pull it together and actually live up to the expectations, but kind of thought that they could keep going for some period of time. And in those cases, do you think that one of the reasons also that it feels like a cold atmosphere before is because there's a lot of people who maybe also have felt that, so that they're kind of like, now we're kind of weeding out?
Yeah. One of the things that managers need to learn is that your other employees know if someone's not performing.
Yeah.
The idea that like you're the only one that knows, and they're going to be like, no, not John. It's like, yeah, they know.
Is he not pulling his weight?
Like, I gave a task to John and he fucked that up. So like, they know that John is usually someone that doesn't get a lot of, help requests and things like that, because you can't rely on John to do the job. So they know, how he's doing. And if you're on a trading team, they definitely know. It's like, that guy costs us money. I'm just happy that he's out of here so we can start making some more money. Right?
One of the things that I've noticed, at least there with people, is exactly as you say, people, they know it. But sometimes I wonder, because I've of course been in the manager position, is why there's no one who comes earlier to kind of explain that to you. Like if you're a coach on a football team, you can kind of see the players play the ball around, and there's only one ball that you need to focus on. But when you have like multiple balls playing, and you can have focus on all stuff, but group one, they have like one player who just can't play the ball, but you only look over there sometimes, and there he doesn't have the ball. You look at other groups, okay, you look back, oh, he still doesn't have the ball. That doesn't make you look that he's a bad player, but you kind of have a sense because you have not had the ball the last 5 times. How, from your experience, is it that no one of that team comes over faster to say, like, John can play for shit?
Yeah. Well, let's start a kind of an easy place, right? So it's like, in a conversation, if you can't hear the voices complaining, then that doesn't mean that no one is upset.
No.
Like that just means that you're no longer hearing what they're saying, right? So the first thing is that you gotta feel that you're in tune with the company. If you think that everything is going well, you have definitely lost contact with your company, right? So you gotta find a way to be back and be part of that conversation, and then I think you'll find out. Like if you honestly go into it and like, okay, they can tell that you're trying to do the best for them. And then we have a conversation about Miguel, and you're saying like he needs some help, and like, okay, let's see what we can do to help Miguel out. If you're there because you want to help Miguel, then they'll tell you that there's a problem with Miguel. They're not going to tell you should fire Miguel because he's also maybe their good friend or something like that. But they'll tell you that Miguel needs help if you're listening for it, right?
And also just in
since you brought it up.
And now that also just throughout your career and also in these billion companies, when everything is going good and the company is growing, are there still now that you said that thing is if you're not listening and you think everything's going good, it's because you're not listening. Is that for also anyone who has all these ideas about how $1 billion company is working and growing, and if everything is just going up, everything's great? Can you share some light on, is that still true when everything's growing, everyone's getting their big bonuses? Are there still complaints?
Yeah, I mean, wherever you are, there's always a limited source of something, right? So either you don't get enough time with the CEO, or you feel like the CEO has it in for you, or you're getting paid less than your colleague, 10 times as much as anyone else in your position would be doing, but you're getting less than your colleague. There's always a problem. There's always something that's not fair because there's a limited amount of resources. Wherever you are, there's something and it's limited, right? You can't give anyone infinite money. It's just like you're always going to have more or less than the next guy. So anything can become your conflict. And that's the funny thing about the privilege of these companies, that everything goes so well, and then, oh, now we're upset about a new thing. It's like, how is it that we can't get my kind of yogurt? Like, what? Well, like, sorry, we'll get right on that. Or like, I would like, to have these whatever drinks that are non-sugar, non-caffeine, that down the list. And whatever level you get to, there's a new level of complaints, right? So
it's the new baseline.
Yeah. So whatever you get to, it's like, well, fundamentally we gotta change people's mindset. Like we have to find a way to make them grateful for what they have. And if we can't show them that it's valuable, then they're not going to appreciate it. So I've had teams of employees that were student employees sitting next to traders. They did some of the same jobs that the traders did, but they were student employees. So their monthly salary was maybe like 20,000 Danish or something like that, right? Or 30 if they did full time maybe. And then the guy next to them is pulling like 70, 150K a month, right? But they're doing kind of the same thing. How is that fair? Well, maybe it isn't, but it could be you one day. So what is your journey right now? If you want that job, go get that job. I'll help you on that journey. And then you can actually be completely content getting much less than the next guy because I'm next in line. Why are you upset about being on the bench? Like if your team is playing, right? Well, you're on the bench, which means that your number is up. If you weren't on the bench, you'd be in the bleachers. And there's no one that gets called onto the field or the court from the bleachers.
Yeah.
Right. So where do you want to be? Like you're not happy about being here? Move up, play better.
Do you think that's surrounded around like, of course, like gratitude, but I wonder if it's because like if you don't complain, the progression stops. Then for the last 20 years we've eaten this one piece of yogurt because no one complained about it, and then suddenly a new guy comes in and says, why don't we change the yogurt around like every 14 days, and then in some way that could be seen as a complaint, right, or something. Could it be surrounded around that people, as Travis said, the baseline, it has to keep moving. But then I think for a lot of owners that have companies, it seems like complaints about why are you not feeling gratitude about this, that we are using resources to like make you feel good. And then they're just like, well, it's made me feel good for the last 3 months, but now it's been like half a year and I don't like it anymore. Yeah. Now I want something new. And it just keeps going up. Do you think is there a connection there?
Yeah. I think what you have to start with is look at the mindset of someone who says, am I either upset that I haven't been promoted, or am I putting out there that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get promoted? Like the guy that comes to me and says, I would like to be the CEO one day. How do I make that happen? I'll help that guy on his journey. And the guy that says, why am I not the CEO of this? Like, well, you haven't earned it. Like, so you look at that, like, and career-wise, where are you in that? Like, if you want to be the victim, you don't need to look for very long to find a reason why you are the victim. But if you're looking to say, like, how can I be the difference maker? Then you're going to be the difference maker, right? And if you come to the company and like, you know what, we're spending money on this product. I think it'd be better if we got this product instead, because it has less sugar and whatever the reason be. Like, sure, we can do that, right? But then you're also taking some kind of initiative. If you sit there and you just complain, then who are you really, right?
Yeah. That's probably where it goes from being like an active progression towards something based on feedback or whatever desire and whatever, to a complaint, is because you come with a solution, and you have reasons for going there, which are good, hopefully, or you just say like, I don't like it, right? I don't like the way we work.
And you can do this with a bottom line perspective. So let's say that we're working late and we're like, okay, dear manager, we'd like to put in some hours, but the problem is at some point we just get hungry and then we usually leave because there's no food. So we go home. Like, what do you think about you guys paying for the food so that we can stay for a little longer? I'm sure that a lot of guys would appreciate that, and it'd feel like recognition for the work that we've done. Boom. It doesn't take a long time to convince the CEO that that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, man, we don't ever get a dinner around here. It's like, well, no, but how have you tried to impact that?
Yeah.
Right. Like, did you just say that you have unfulfilled needs? Well, yes, you're going to have that until you die.
Yeah.
Right. Like that is like the fact that you don't have everything that you want. That's not really something that I take too seriously. But if you're saying that we can become better as a whole, like that I like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. There's a totally different mindset in that as well, I guess. Yeah. And when you're also saying that if somebody has a goal, comes to you with a goal that you'd be like, I would like to help you reach that goal. And since you've come to me with that, and the people who come very naively just complaining, then it's like, well, okay, you have a poor mindset here. How important is it for you to be giving feedback to people? Is it usually only when people come to you with stuff, or do you schedule in feedback sessions or ask for feedback yourself from your team and that kind of thing? And does that ever additionally tie into what we talked about before too, with like when you have to fire someone, like Mikko was saying, you would sit down and say, well, you know why you're being fired, right? Yeah. Is that because they've had 10 meetings with you where you're just like, hey, it's not going so great, is it? Yeah. Or is it like all of a sudden, boom, you're fired and out the door? Or what process do you go through?
Well, I mean, the situation is different whether you're in HR or you're the manager, right? But as a manager, I've had the talk where I came up to a guy and said, yeah, like we're at a situation now where you've made mistakes repeatedly. And the situation is that the next time I can't protect you, right? We're at a point now where if you make another mistake, that's the end of the road for you. And you could tell he was like, shit, but the good thing was he would know what would happen the next time if he made a mistake.
Yeah.
And so the ability to be completely honest about that, but also respectful, is a great ability to have as a manager.
Also empowering them, I suppose.
Yeah, but mostly it clears the air of where we are, right? So it's not that he knows that right now my intention is not to fire you, right? I've cleared the air on that. I said, like, what's happened now, I'm not firing you. But I also am telling you that if it happens again, you are definitely fired. So you don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah.
You know that right now we're good. More of this, then we're not good.
Yeah, the expectation is set.
Yeah. And then the part about the feedback, the most important lesson that I tell anyone that tries to go into management is like, whenever you know it, try to say it, right? So whenever you realize, that wasn't great, don't like wait for the opportunity to say it. Just grab the person and be like, okay, you got a minute, and then just get it out there. Now, if you're angry, wait. But if you're not angry, just say it right away.
Yeah.
And then you learn as time goes by that what usually happens is that your emotion increases the longer you keep it.
Oh, yeah.
So now it's relieving for you to get it out right away. You're like, oh, by the way, that was a big fuck up. Can we talk about what you're going to do to clean it up and how we avoid it in the future? And I've had employees that come to me and like, why aren't you yelling at me? I really messed up. I'm like, I can tell you, like, you're on your own, on your own, just figuring out a way to punish yourself. I don't need to add to that punishment. Like, you're good. Like, you're feeling enough pain. I don't need to help you feel pain. All we have to do now is figure out what we're going to do, right? So you balance it out. Red light, green light. You're trying to balance out as much as you can.
That's a funny situation when you talk about that, because I feel like that there's two different situations. There's one where they have fucked up because they've done some kind of mistake, which is naturally, and you can see on them that they don't need more fuel on the fire, right? But you also need them to know that it was not okay and that it is a bad situation, but you'll help them, right? Then there's also the people where they do something that is so wrong in terms of how you operate and everyone around them operate, and they don't punish themselves because they're like almost ignorant to what have happened. And what I've noticed there is, I read a book many years ago now where it said exactly that thing. The longer you wait, the more uncontrollable and emotional you'll be. But once you see it with your eyes, you can be like, hey man, that's not okay. You kind of know that, right? And that's it. And then they are like, oh, then maybe they didn't even know. Or there could be many things that kind of, and you get that. And I've just had it so many times where I'm like, why the fuck are you doing this? And where, oh yeah, just go and say it. Why are you doing this? Oh, it's because I thought you said, no, that's not what I said. And then you kind of realize that the emotions that was about to go off the roof inside of yourself, they're not rooted in anything based on data because they misunderstanding or whatever it could be. And that's just...
But I think that goes back to the example I had earlier about when do you check in or when do you respond to something? It's like, okay, let's say that, and my kids have become part of many of the analogies that I use now. It's like, okay, I'm walking down, down the street with my son. He walks next to the curb, and I'm like, no, please get back in. So we're teaching him that the curb is important, right? Before he even like crosses the curb, we're saying, get back in, And then when, like, if you waited and you're like, okay, I'm going to wait until he's in the street and I'm just going to yell at him, then eventually he's like, well, all this yelling, what does this mean, right? But we want to teach him when we don't have to yell at him. So we're like, okay, get back in. And we for some reason think that, well, if we do this feedback, then we have to be so right about it. We have to get this like super quality feedback. And it doesn't have to be that. It can just be like, you know what? Like in that meeting, I didn't feel that's how we should be doing this. And like, I'll try to think about, if there's a way you can do it better, but like, I'm not comfortable with how that went. And it's like, okay, now I'm starting to get a sense of where's the curb, right?
Yeah.
So like we have that at our disposal, but we feel like we have to be so right about it. Well, just try to talk a lot, and then eventually the curb will be clear to someone else. It's almost like these self-driving cars, right? They're getting a lot of pictures, and like, okay, eventually they know what another car looks like, and they know, okay, let's not drive into that one.
Or cat.
Or cat.
Which brings me back to like when you go back, Carsten, throughout your career, and you've had some crazy growth journeys. What have been something that you just over and over again have seen in the different companies that is the same, that have been the hardest about scaling?
Yeah. One problem that we see again and again is that if you become too greedy with how many people you want to hire, you end up hiring people that you shouldn't hire. So you become flexible on your criteria, and that always has disastrous outcomes.
So like you want more people to get more output, I suppose, in any kind of situation, and then you start lowering
the standard for who you want to hire.
That's something that we've talked about that I think is kind of interesting with the A players. Is you talk about, can you actually get the A players, and let's just say now you do, but you also know that pond is limited with fish, and is that where you then sacrifice culture for more revenue or potentially more profit?
But it brings me to the next part, which is, if you don't have your training done by the best people in the company, eventually you're going to have this watered down effect. So if I teach you to do something and you teach it to Travis, he's not going to be as good at it as you are. There's no way that he's going to be as good at it because you were teaching him and you lost something. Whatever it is,
that makes sense.
You lost something. But if I keep teaching you and I keep teaching Travis, then it gets better. Like Travis might actually be a better trained individual than you are because I keep training, right?
And you'll become better.
And I'll become better.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the temptation is to say, well, that guy is important now because he's a manager or he's the senior trader or something like that. So he shouldn't be doing that. And then you start to get this washed out effect. You know, the copy of the copy, and eventually you can barely tell what it says on the paper, right?
Oh man,
that's super interesting. Yeah. And I've also wondered about it too, where like we've been in situations where we really needed to hire like 2 or 3 people because there was so much work to be done and the deadline was approaching. But there was also maybe 1 or 2 that were like, they kind of need to go.
Yeah.
But then we would all of a sudden need to be hiring 4, 5, 6 people, and it's like a 3-month process at least to get someone in. And have you experienced that? Whereas like, what do we actually do here? Do we get these people out and then get even further behind on the deadline? And then like that was quite a...
Well, one of the things that we saw at Incommodities, for instance, is the difference between the people that were constantly recruiting, not hiring, but recruiting candidates, right? They were getting their bench ready. You know, so it's like whenever they needed to get rid of John, the poor John that we always talk about.
Freaking John.
Poor John.
They knew who was on the bench. They knew who to call and be like, I have a relationship with this guy. He knows that whenever something opens up, he's the guy I'm going to call. So they knew who the next hire was going to be, right? And the difference there was tremendous. You could tell the quality of the people that they hired because they had a good guy ready. You know, just needed to plug him somehow, right?
So recruiting basically being networking, hiring, being offering a job.
Yeah.
More or less.
And introducing them to the culture and, you know, finding out if there's a match, because there's so much to recruiting that's not just about, you know, okay, do I have 10 friends that like me, right? There's saying like, okay, could you see yourself doing this? Like, what kind of role could I develop for you where you'd be interested in joining the company? And then all of a sudden it's like, right now I got it. Like,
fuck off, John.
Yeah.
You're fired.
And the thing is that it gives that manager such a confidence to fire someone because it's like, I got my bench. Like,
that's something that we've talked about a lot is the thing about when people say you should always be hiring.
Yeah.
Always be hiring. And in the beginning, I was like, I mean, yeah, sure, if you're like Airbnb and Uber or something like that with unlimited, but really figuring out like that's not what it's all about. But it's always about that you do not compromise, first of all, your own team, but also the business in not being able to pull the trigger on people who shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Because you owe it to the people who shouldn't be there, but you most of all owe it to the people who already are there.
Yeah.
And
So always be recruiting.
yeah, always be recruiting.
Have a guy on your bench, at least one guy on your bench all the time.
That's something that we didn't do.
That's been a part of the real world MBA. Yeah. But what as we go through, I'm also curious. Like we've been curious about a lot of things because it's been pulling from our own experience and everything like that. But from where you're coming from, what have we not asked you about yet that we should have?
What you're missing is how do I find my right culture? And I think that's going to be a struggle that every company has to go through. It's like, well, what is the culture? And then how do I even express that? So like, I know that this guy feels right, but how do I get that feeling of right into something that I can communicate so that others can help me, for instance, recruit the next guy, right? So how do I make it clear, what do we stand for? And then understanding that there's not one size that fits all. So it's not like, well, let's just say the same thing that they do at Uber. Well, that's not going to do it for you necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Because you're hiring someone else. So you have to find a way to express that one thing that gets you the right people, right?
When you said that, it just got me thinking, and it's of course just because it's fresh off my mind from listening to the Airbnb guy. His philosophy was that culture is when people act and do in the code of what you have established as, you can say, core principles or values, whatever it is, when you're not there.
Yeah.
When he said, let me take an example. The closest people to me, they can hear my voice saying it's not good enough. So they know when they have meetings without me and it's not good enough, they say to each other, this is not good enough.
Yeah.
And he just had this extremely interesting perspective on that culture. You can, he said, it will help to write out stuff. Of course, it will move some of the way, but people, they need to act in a certain way, and you're the only one who can start from the bottom and do that. And he just said, like, it's the hardest thing to do because you have to live those values every day.
Yeah.
And that got me to something that we talked about for some time ago, is finding the people who are motivated to work with you, not because of per se what skills you have, but who you are, what you bring to the table each day. Is that something that you've experienced in your teams when you've had some of the A players and you had to hire more into that? Is that a trait that you've kind of seen that, oh, now another wolf, is ready to hunt with the others? Or
yeah, I think that when you get that cultural fit, that you get that benefit. Because for me, like you said, that culture is the thing that they do when you're not there. I feel like it's compliance is what you can say is the bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
I tell you what to do, you do what I need you to do. Culture is that thing that adds to that. Right?
Yeah.
So you'll always have compliance, because if you don't comply, you will be fired. Like that I'll always have. But if I want to have great companies, that addition of culture has to be great.
Yeah.
And it is true that, if it's not there when you're not there, then you have a cultural problem.
Yeah.
But it could also be the extension of what you do when you're there. So if I come down, I'm like, all right, let's go, guys. Then what do people interpret that as, right? Is that punishment? Is it time to duck? Or is it like, he's feeling this, he's invigorating the business, and I want to prove to him that something is going on.
Yeah.
Like for me, that's part of designing your culture. And it doesn't mean that you know the precise words to say it, but you know what it is. Mm-hmm. You recognize it when you see it, so you can reward others for behaving that way. So you might not have the perfect words to describe it, but you're like, I know that works, right? So let's say, what does it mean to be charming? Well, it's going to be hard for us to write down like, okay, this is how you're charming.
Yeah.
But we can certainly go up to someone and say, you're really charming. And I like that. Like, do more of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean about designing your culture. Like, you know what it looks like.
Yeah.
So you can remember that that's what you got to push, right? That's where you got to be vigilant. You're like pushing that culture and be like, yes, more of that, right? And rewarding that tremendously so that everybody, like with money and with praise, right? Rewarding that, okay, this guy got promoted because he is the culture, right? He's the guy that we're looking for in the future, right?
Outside of that, do you have any tangible or quantifiable methods for describing culture, maybe in a job interview or to the team if something goes off track or is particularly on track or something? Is there a way to sort of like give feedback to teammates or describe it to people external of the organization?
Well, it ironically kind of creates a loop on itself, what we said earlier. So we do feedback early, and sometimes we give feedback that's not very precise, but it's very intense. So we're like, we feel strongly about what you just have done, right? So let's say that someone, does something with us, like pushes us something like that at work. We're like, no, like I don't want that. Like that's a strong reaction, and we all recognize that pattern, right? Negative feedback, we know like strong emotions, that's how we do it. How do we develop an ability to give strong emotions into positive feedback? Because we're usually just very calm and collected, and we're like, hey, you did that, and good project, and do more of that in the future. Instead of like conveying the fact that, you know what, like that was super. Like the guys over in sales, they were jumping up and down. We need more of that. Like, what can you do? Like, can you teach someone else to do the same thing? Like, what do you have? Like, how can you get into this fight so we can do more of that? Why aren't we excited about giving that feedback?
God, that's so interesting. Now that you say it, that is so true. Like positive feedback and raises and stuff like that. That's always like a very mellow. Like we think you've done very good for the last year, so we think you deserve this, and keep doing what you're doing. Yeah. Where it's not like woo.
Yeah, and it must also be like if somebody has a day where they make the company 10 million kroner. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's a lot in your world or not, but some really, really good trade, right? Mm-hmm. Like, obviously, everyone's like, hey, that was great. Let's do more of that. Yeah. But I can imagine going back like all the way to the beginning of our conversation here today. Well, Carsten, when you were talking about a part of what you do is being hyper vigilant and really being tuned out into people, so that there's little thing where you see Jen walk by and somebody missed the garbage can, so she picks up the paper and throws it away, and you're like, yes, that's the point. Yeah, like helping each other out and being a team player. Like, is picking up trash going to make the company more profit? No, but it's the mindset around it and being pumped about that and being able to like jump on that and not necessarily this like exploding 10 million trade. That's like, I mean, obviously that was good. Like,
And I think for me, like it's again, like we have the results and we have the culture, right? And if you concern yourself with the culture a lot, then you'll get those results eventually. Like you try to become a good basketball player and then you become a millionaire, right? So, you focus on the culture, and then you will have that company that does those amazing things. Because the young talent you bring in is going to do way better if they're in an environment that teaches them how to do the right things. Yeah. And yes, like you get excited about those things. Whenever someone picks up their cup after an interview, I say, that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. So even at the interview, we're priming them to know we're looking for people that, take ownership, tie up the loose ends,
being proactive.
That sort of thing. So we do that from the beginning, right? That's just, like, as soon as you bring your cup, you're like, that's a good job, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, I'll take it. You don't have to worry about it, but I appreciate you wanting to bring your cup out. And it's a small thing, but it makes a difference. If someone doesn't bring the cup, that's also a good opportunity to be like, hey, that's not cool.
Yeah.
And if someone brings someone else's cup, hey, I like that you took ownership of that.
Double.
Yeah.
Double thumbs up. John, you can survive one more day.
Yeah. Dodge a bullet, John.
Yeah. Carsten, if you go back now and see your like path as a leader, what's one time where you were like, I fucked up here, that you kind of regret now?
I think the moment that I realized I was wrong about something is when an employee came to me and said, "You know what? Right now, there's an attitude of looking for mistakes in what we're doing, and you know better than this. You know that you need to create a positive vibe if you want people to learn." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do know that." Like that didn't feel good because I got called on my own approach to how to do things, but the manager of that team was pushing fear into the employees, and that's not what I stand for. And so it's like, yeah, I got to own that as well. You know, you got to, whenever, like, the fact that they're not your direct reports doesn't excuse you for anything, right? You own everything that's below you. And the tough part about being a CEO is that you own everything.
Yeah.
So I had to own that. And I was like, yeah, I'll do better. And then we started working on that, and we did better.
That was also a courageous thing for the employee to say.
Yeah,
it seems like as well.
Yeah, but she was fantastic.
Awesome.
She got rewarded.
She got John's job. What's the worst part about your job that you've had in the past? About being in this HR role? What's the worst part?
Often you have to make the decision that doesn't feel right to you, right? So you have to go out and execute something like, okay, this is definitely not going to be good for this one person. Or someone comes to you and like, I have a request, can we do this? And just like, I know what management is trying to do. I know the direction that they're setting, and this is just going to run right over you. And you just have to, you can't derail that train and get it away from that person. You're just like, I'd encourage you to get off the tracks, but the train's coming. And if you don't, get out of the way, it is going to run you over, and you just can't stop it. And you know that it's happening, and sometimes you can't even warn them. That's the worst part about it. So you get in HR, you get a lot of information, and you're just like, oh, that sucks, right?
Yeah.
So I will know about people that are about to be fired and then don't, and it's like, okay, well, you don't know how close you came. And, the letter was filled out and we were ready to do it, but then you kind of, help yourself get out of that situation. Or you'll know about it like weeks in advance, and you're just like, how you doing, John? Good to see you.
Oh, I want to touch upon that because that's something that I'm extremely bad at. That's why he's laughing.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I found really interesting that you said is that often in these energy trading positions, when you get fired, that's like literally from the minute that you get it set to a face, then you stop working, like literally. Where in most engineering positions, you have some kind of like
resignation period where you're still working.
Exactly. And for me, that is like such a hard period of time, because once I've cut ties, I'm like, I don't. There's a reason why I fired you.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be looking at you.
You don't want to live with the girlfriend that you dumped.
Yeah. Exactly. And
it's so true.
Yeah. There's something in me that feels fake, hanging around someone who I already discarded in my life.
Yeah.
But I just found it interesting. Can you just, for people who don't know how energy trading is, like touch upon why is it that people like, what kind of damage can they do if they have a resignation period?
Yeah. So if they sit there, they basically have the access to the profit of the company. So you can just click, and then just destroy value at an incredible pace. Like if you make mistakes, they could be, like €500,000 or dollars or whatever it might be your number. Like that's the kind of level that you're at. If you have someone that sees no point to being there, doing that kind of job, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah. So they can, because there's no way to kind of prosecute that, because everyone in that field can, I suppose, also when you have your employment contract, it states that you will not get prosecuted if you make mistakes or some kind of to guard an employee, that if you make a mistake, you're not going to be sued for millions and so that's where it can get tricky to kind of as a company to follow up on that if there's been two oopsies before he left, and that cost the company like a couple of millions.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do. It's just part of the job, right?
You basically just bite the bullet on that resignation period and just pay them off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you don't have them reorganize the paper filing cabinet or something.
John, get down there.
Storage
get down to the printer.
Like, while you are somewhat entitled to do that, because then you could, they could say that this is considered a resignation of their, or a dismissal of their title, then it's like, yeah, but we can't fire you twice. So it's like, it doesn't change much. But yeah, we don't do that, because how do you want them around? And to be honest, I had an employee working in HR where we decided this is not going to be a good fit. Things weren't really working out. And it's like, okay, now we give you the resignation period. And he was shit. Like, I looking back on it, we probably made negative progress by having this person around. It's like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have just cut ties, right?
Yeah.
And at least try to do it like handover and then cut ties, right? What are you winning? Like, if you tell someone, like, if you work hard, do the handover quickly, then you could be out of here in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They're going to say yes to that. They're going to be like, okay, 2 weeks vacation? Sure, man.
Yeah.
I'll put in an effort so that we can get to that point quickly. Aligning, your targets, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Like, hand it over quickly, get out of here, see you later.
Exactly on that line. Do you ever hire the replacement first, knowing you're going to fire someone, and then fire them? Or is it always like, as soon as you know, then it's like fire and then hand off to a coworker and then hire a new person, but then not have as good of a one to train them? Or
I've done both. And I think the smaller the team, the more forced you are to find the replacement. So I've had to hire people and be like, yeah, so this person's going to do this other thing. And that wasn't the case, but it was just a replacement brought in to be like, okay, and then I want you to hand over these key tasks, right? So that we can get this person up and running. And then it was like, okay, you're out of here.
Yeah.
How does people take that? Like, do they figure it out and then they're more mad in their like firing process? Or are they like, I see that? Or do you sense sometimes that they like kind of see it coming and then they're like relaxed when you fire them on?
Well, the funny thing is, like,
and how does it affect the team's trust in you as well? That you're like, oh, it's just to help people out. Just kidding, you're fired.
And like, if we take a recent example, the person that ended up being fired has contacted me afterwards and had like a pleasant conversation, and we talked about why things didn't work out, and got a little more into their situation and what was going on, and like a complete understanding of why we had to do what we had to do. But also the replacement, you kind of have to be honest with them and be like, okay, this is what you're going into.
Yeah.
We're hiring you and you got to be on the beat because we got to get this person replaced. And then they know at least that, you're trying to do your best to be honest with as many people as possible. But there's also, in most people, a respect that you don't want to know that someone is coming to take your job. So they know that you have to be a little subtle about it, right?
Yeah.
If you say, like, this person's coming in and they're going to do your tasks, it's like, okay, what's that about?
Well, John, figure that one out for yourself.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, John?
Yeah. Time to reflect.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
We've had situations where we fired someone and the plan was like a month and a half, right? So from a month and a half, we did like all these things, like putting them into place. And there were probably like 15 people in the know, all part of the plan to be like, okay, we have to do a handover on all of these things, because as soon as we let this guy go, he's out the company and we can't access the information anymore. So if anything is tied up on his access or, logins or whatever it is, we have to figure that out. And that plan sucked, right?
Let's just say an A player that turns B player, or the higher in the company in an energy trading or other company where they've been there for more and more time and they have more and more
Seniority.
Yeah, seniority. is that where the case is, that then the process will just drag out that more because there's so much more on the line of years and years of experience and context? And
Well, usually it's a combination of the fact that they've been there for a long time, so they are involved in many things. There's a lot of legacy that they're part of, and they've been somewhat protective about what they've been doing, right? So they haven't shared with someone else, which is why one of the first things we do is we encourage this culture of sharing, right? So you got to get backups, you got to get someone else to know what they're doing, so we don't fail if something happens to you. And that's the way we communicate. It's like, if something happens to you, like, we're not planning on it, but if something happens to you, we want the business to continue. And once that's your credo and everybody recognizes that, then it's not dangerous that someone else is trying to figure out what you're doing.
that makes sense.
Well, it is like, it's a good and healthy culture to have, that you don't want one guy to be, the only one that can fix it, right?
Because they could also, from one day to the next, just take a new job.
Precisely.
So
it's a reasonable defensive maneuver on the part of the company,
which you should more or less have on everybody at all times.
Yeah,
more or less anyway. So.
You'll always have something that is just known by one person, right?
Yeah.
So there's maybe it's like a sales lead that comes in, and it's only that salesman that knows. But then along in the process, it's like, okay, you have to get more people involved in, like, okay, how do you document your leads and things like that, so that you can have someone else take over?
That makes sense. On the final note, Carsten, if you want to share one advice with people who want to get into HR that you wish that you knew before you were getting involved, what would that be?
I think the most important thing is that you have to understand that you have to make plans for everything. So people get into HR, and a lot of people go into it be like, I would like to work with development of people, or I would like to to care for the people, or whatever your agenda is. You go in, that's your thing, and then you're like, okay, but you have to do this on a scale, and if you're going to do it on a scale, then you need to have good plans, and everything just like, you end up like, oh, it takes this long to do that, and it takes that long to do that. So you're constantly in a battle with time, to do things the right way. And I don't think that people realize that about going into HR, that there is so much extra work besides the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So you gotta love doing that as well. You gotta see purpose in that. Otherwise, you're gonna just burn out and be like, there's no fun in that.
And sometimes now that you just take on that, is that because to implement stuff that you on a grand scale, it takes so long time that if you don't have these plans, sooner or later you'll either burn out because you had a North Star, but that kind of get blurry because of all the problems, complaints, management, new direction. Is that why that having that plan, that's what keeps you like, I'm on target?
Yeah, and I think an important thing is that if I know I can only move, like, let's say we're on a chessboard, right? And I can only move one field at a time, then I got to plan out, where am I going? So if I'm the king and I'm going to the other end, I know that I'm doing like 8 across and then 3 to the side, or whatever might be the case, right? So like, you have to have that plan so you can move one at a time, because otherwise you're just moving around with no purpose, right? So make that long-term plan and then get it cut down to size. Like the best thing that you can be in HR is a good project manager, because you're going to have long-term things and then implementation that's slow and involves a lot of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't project manage that, you're going to have a problem.
Do you have any kind of tools for doing that for people who's already in HR that kind of like not recognizing to what you're saying that you've been using before, to kind of like any kind of process?
For me, it's always been trying to get this idea of the purpose of what you're doing. So be clear about that, like writing down that this is what we're trying to do long term, and then doing the actual selling on the short step, right? To say like, okay, how do we benefit from A to B? So you create a vision for yourself and like, okay, this is my vision. And then you do selling on step 1. You're saying like, okay, but look at this. If we do this thing, we're going to have this benefit. You can't sell the whole journey. No one as a CEO is going to be like, okay, I get the whole journey. But you could be like, well, let's just do one thing. They did this thing at Norlys recently where they said, well, how about we don't say just one day off if your child is sick? We just let them take as much as possible. And then what does that create? Well, let's have a look at it. What are the reasons why they're taking time off? What do they actually do because they only have one day? And then clear all that up and let's implement this system. What is the cost that we do of this? And what value could it create in form of marketing or whatever it might be? And so they've created at Norlys a benefit that's of very little cost, but has a tremendous value in how they promote their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we value families because if your child is sick, you can stay home more than just one day.
Yeah, and what you've also talked about this before, which I was super interesting, is that at one of the banks in Denmark, you had this limited budget for how much you could spend when you were going somewhere on travels, and then they sliced that because everybody was using it to the max, usually, or close to the max, just below, and then they said, now it's just free.
Yeah.
Now you can just spend.
Yeah, they did that at Jyske for a while, and they're like. Jyske Bank, and then they're like, okay, let's try to cut it and see what happens. And they just use feedback and be like, take a reasonable hotel, right? And the funny thing is that then when you go to New York, your reasonable hotel would be over the budget.
Mm-hmm.
But the reasonable hotel, if you're going to, I don't know, we're in Brønderslev now, it's probably somewhat cheaper here compared to New York. And so you end up getting a better deal because people will find the same standard, but the prices will be below the budget. And before that, they were just saying okay, how do I max out this limit?
Yeah.
And then you had people complaining that, okay, I can't afford a hotel, even the worst hotel I can't afford on my limit. And so you have a situation that hurts both parties. That's what you gotta give that feedback. And we had the same thing at In Commodities, where it's like people come and what is the budget for team events? And I said, look at the other teams. What have they done? Do something like that, and then no one will complain. And it just worked out.
Yeah.
Because everybody was accountable for the level, right? It was like, well, I don't want to be the guy that does something with my team, and then everybody looks at me and okay, what are those guys on about?
Yeah.
Just do something that's reasonable, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I suppose that's where when you have something that's fixed, no one takes ownership.
Exactly.
Because it's right there.
Yeah.
It's just
I'm within
standard.
the frame.
Yeah, I'm within the frame. But when there is no frame other than the boundaries is logic or reason, then people start thinking I wonder if this would be okay.
Yeah.
Or if it was me personally, I would probably. And then you have those people who in any position maybe violate it, and then you have a little bit of feedback, and then other people will also maybe be like, you shouldn't have done that, right?
Exactly.
And then that fixes itself.
And you use feedback to be the controlling mechanism.
Yeah.
You're okay, now you're in the streets. Get back on the curb.
Yeah.
There's one situation where we were in Algonquin this past summer, and I said, this is probably the safest intersection in the world. It had 5 roads going into it, and all of it below 180 degrees, right? So it had this one road and then 3 others feeding into it in one intersection. And when I drove through it, I'm I have no idea if I have the right of way or if I'm going or not, and what lane should I be in. But everybody was so aware of what to do that they did the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we got to promote in people. We got to be try to be aware of what the right thing to do is. And if we get a good culture where people are indeed aware of that, then we'll kind of look out for each other.
That makes a lot of sense because it kind of ties into the Airbnb guy. Is when the culture becomes the thing that kind of lives on its own, but it's rooted in these things that everybody says loud and they practice it. Then it becomes that the people will perform.
Yeah.
Carsten, is there anything else we missed that should be recorded on this episode?
Just remember to have a good time. Whatever you're doing in life, have a good time.
Remember, people, to have fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning from you.
My pleasure.
Definitely.
See you later. You've been listening to the Growing Forward podcast with your hosts, Mick and Trav.